program, the Paycheck Protection Program. The initial $397 billion that we authorized as part of the CARES Act was fully deployed within about 2 weeks. We also largely ran through the EIDL program, the Economic Injury Disaster Program, which was in the first package that we passed in Congress. Went back to, I want to say February. Lose track of all that we've done, but an initial $7 billion expansion. Recall the EIDL program is a loan to cover your working capital that goes through traditional credit checks with the SBA. The PPP program has no credit check associated with it, but it is, sorry, I have a little pop-up here. But it's paid out based on your payroll, and the PPP is really designed to make sure that all of your employees stay on salary and get paid and don't put you in a liquidity squeeze. What we voted on, well, before I get to what we voted on this week, the good news about the PPP program was that we got a lot of money into the economy. We are keenly aware that that money did not flow out to all the places we wanted it to get to. We expanded definitions to include nonprofits. We wanted to expand to make sure that we got people who may not traditionally have robust banking relationships, but as the program was set up and rolled out, as happens in these situations, the folks who had existing banking relationships, the banks who were sophisticated and set up, got the money out the door quicker than those who didn't. And so as we expanded the program this past week, we put an additional $310 billion into the program. And the rules are basically the same as before. The eligibility still covers nonprofits, still covers businesses below 500 people. We also doubled the EIDL program. So that's now, you remind me of the numbers. I think it's another $20 billion. Bo, you'll correct me if I've got that number off the top of my head wrong in the EIDL program. Significantly smaller than the PPP, but a different type of loan. So that was also expanded in the last program. But what we also did in the PPP was set aside $60 billion of that $310 billion expansion, specifically to get to some of the folks who weren't quite reached well in the last one. So community banks, credit unions, community development groups that are sort of in harder to reach areas, to really try to make sure that at least a portion of that money gets into some of the areas that we intended it to get to last time, but just was a little slow before it got through. We also, just for completeness, added an additional $100 billion of funding for the healthcare system, $75 billion to hospitals, because a lot of hospitals are getting squeezed right now, and $25 billion for additional testing, which is really important because, with the scope of this money going out the door and the rate that it is being consumed, I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that until we get the public health crisis under control, we're really not going to be at a point where the economy can start to recover. And so it's critical for us to do that. There were some other things that I would have liked to have done, but unfortunately we did not get sufficient support in the Senate or bipartisan support in the House. There's a whole lot of employers who are not small businesses and are not nonprofits. Primarily folks who are employed by state and municipal agencies, teachers, firefighters, policemen, people running the unemployment insurance program. And there are some real gaps there. That's going to be a push going forward. I mention that because we have put almost $3 trillion out the door in response to COVID and emergency funding in the last 2 months, month and a half. The rate at which we are putting it out the door is accelerating, but I would not work under the assumption that we are going to be back in 2 weeks renewing the PPP program. Maybe we will, maybe there will be pressure. I expect this money will go out the door very quickly, but those other pockets and groups that have needed resources really got left out in this program. So I expect politically that will probably be where the pressure is in this next round. Again, states, municipalities, the Postal Service. So just take that into consideration as you think through. I'm not making predictions. I just would say I would not get used to the idea that every 2 weeks we inject another $400 billion into the economy or whatever the latest number is. But with that, as I've said on these calls before, our job in Congress is to pass the laws. The job in the executive branch is to implement those laws. And so as those laws are becoming implemented, it falls to people like Bo Steiner to set up the programs, run the programs, administer them from the Small Business Authority. So we'll now hand over to Bo to talk through what that process looks like on the administrative side, so that you all know how to get in the queue, get processed, so that you can hopefully gain access to this next round of funding. Thanks a bunch, and Bo, the floor is yours. Bo, I think you may be muted.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks to all of you who've joined today. This is really timely information. As Congressman mentioned, Congress appropriated additional funding for many of the programs that SBA has been working to help support small businesses, entrepreneurs, nonprofits to navigate the economic challenges that COVID-19 represents to many of you. The Congressman's point, $310 billion was appropriated for the Paycheck Protection Program, $50 billion for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and an additional $10 billion for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance Program. I'm going to talk about all of those. The Paycheck Protection Program, which I will call PPP going forward, that actually opens up for application through the participating lenders on Monday at 9:30 a.m. Central Time. So just to give you some timelines for when things are really going to start moving, again, from the standpoint of the PPP. From the standpoint of the Economic Injury Disaster Loan and the advance, those programs, the application portal is not currently open. We took a lot of applications in while it was open and are currently going through processing those applications on a first in, first out basis. We're hopeful, however, that the portal will open up again for the EIDL and the EIDL Advance so that you will have an opportunity to apply if you have not already. Today I'll also talk about SBA debt relief, which is another component of the CARES Act, which provides for some significant benefit to businesses that have SBA loans. And then I'll talk about SBA Express Bridge loans, just one more debt tool in place to help you as a small business owner. So let's start with the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm just going to hit the high points on this because I know everybody wants to get to their questions, but really important that everybody has some context for as far as the overview. This program offers the opportunity for applicants to qualify for loans of up to $10 million as determined by your average monthly payroll expense. These loans are SBA guaranteed loans, meaning that you apply for this loan through a private sector lender. The funds are dispersed from that lending institution, and it is a 2-year term loan at 1% interest. Now, the major benefit or major advantage to this program is that if you use at least 75% of the proceeds from that loan on payroll expenses, then you may be eligible for forgiveness for up to 100% of the loan amount. Essentially, the federal government will pay off that loan with the bank on your behalf. So, huge opportunity to help you as a small business owner maintain your payroll, support your employees, support their benefits during this extremely challenging period. Eligible entities are businesses, generally speaking, are businesses as well as nonprofits, 501c3, 501c19 with fewer than 500 employees. Note that sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed are also eligible to apply for the PPP. For those of you that are business owners that are applying and you do employ some 1099 independent contractors, note that you are not eligible, you cannot apply for the PPP loan, including them as payroll costs, because they are eligible to apply on their own. I just want to reinforce that because that's a common question that we hear, and it's really important part of how your loan amount is calculated. We just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. Next slide, please. So from
Bo,
yeah.
if I just interrupt on that last point, this is it's one of the imperfect things of the program that's hard to get exactly right. But if you do employ those 1099 folks, please make sure that they know that they are eligible independently to apply, because it is a concern that we've had that the idea was not to allow double dipping on that. But I think the consequence is a lot of the independent contractors don't necessarily know that they have these tools available. And we want to make sure they're not left out. So if that's your situation, please make sure to let them know that they can put in for an application as an individual and go through and get it done. Thanks.
Thank you for that. 100%. As far as how you apply, you can apply through a private sector lender that's supporting the program. That may be an SBA 7A lender, some other federally insured depository institution, credit union, farm credit system. In addition, we've opened up the network of lenders that are eligible to apply to be lenders through the PPP program to include non-bank lenders, including community development financial institutions, SBA certified development corporations, SBA microlender intermediaries, as well as fintech lenders. So broad spectrum of lenders that are available to support the program. If your bank, let's say that you typically bank with for your business needs, is not supporting the program or no longer accepting applications for whatever reason, and you need to identify a lender to work with, you can use the Paycheck Protection Program Lender Finder. The link is on the screen at sba.gov/paycheck protection/find. And you can find lenders through that avenue. But again, there's a broad spectrum of lenders that are available. There are lenders that are still accepting applications for the program at this time. From a standpoint of eligibility constraints, we talked about the size of the business. The other key component is that you were in business as of February 15th, 2020, and either had employees for whom you paid salaries and payroll taxes or paid independent contractors. And we are going to accept applications until either the sooner of either the appropriation is exhausted and or June 30th of 2020. Next slide. So the application process itself is pretty straightforward. Again, as you identify your lender, understanding their process is going to be really important. So make sure you reach out to them. Do they want you to fill out the paper form of the application? Do they have an online portal that they've developed that basically mirrors what the information that's requested from the SBA or the paper application? Understand that, understand what kind of supporting documents they're going to want to see. That will depend on your situation. If you're a sole proprietor, they may want to see the 1040 Schedule C. If you're an S Corp or a business that you have a number of employees, they may want to see your W-3. So just having all that documentation prepared is really going to streamline that process when you go to apply with the lender. Essence of how you calculate your loan amount is basically a 12-month look back on your average payroll costs. And I'll talk about what constitutes payroll costs in a second, but 12-month look back can be from now, it can be using 2019 numbers. If you're seasonal, there's another calculation that you can use to calculate your average monthly payroll. Suffice to say that you figure out the average monthly payroll, you multiply that times 2.5, that is your maximum loan amount. And qualified payroll costs for calculating that amount include your cash compensation, right? Which is, and you can include cash compensation up to a maximum of $100,000 per employee. So each employee, if say you have an employee that makes $125,000, only $100,000 of that compensation can be contributed towards payroll costs for the purposes of the calculation. Cash tips, payment for different types of leave. You can also support benefits as payroll costs. So health insurance premiums, retirement contributions, and state and local taxes assessed on compensation of employees. I think of it kind of like through the lens of what are those costs that you need to pay in order to support that individual employee. And in many ways, that covers many of the costs that you'll be using to calculate the payroll amount. Next slide. Equally helpful sometimes is what doesn't qualify. So again, as I mentioned, paid to 1099 independent contractors, not an eligible contributing cost, rent, mortgage interest, other expenses outside of that, those payroll elements are not eligible to contribute. So if you have applied already, and let's say through the first tranche of funds for the PPP, you have not received notification that you're approved, and or you talked to your bank and they said, yeah, we weren't able to fully process it and get it to the SBA for approval. What do you do now? The first thing is to talk to your lender and figure out what their process is. Some lenders continue to process the applications they had in place in preparation for potential additional funding that was available. So that's, you want to verify that. And I would encourage you to figure out where you are in the queue, if that's possible, to figure out what that is too, to know what the likelihood is that in this next tranche of funds, whether or not you're far enough up in the queue that you'll be submitted to SBA for approval. If you know, and then you're going to have to make that individual business assessment of whether you want to continue with the existing lender, identify another lender. That's kind of up to you. But just, you know, I think you just need to frame get your mind frame around like, okay, what's my current situation, and then make a good business decision for your particular organization. Next slide. And then on the back end, so once you're approved, I think this is a really important consideration too, is the forgiveness piece. So basically what the rules call for is that 8 weeks following the period of that we're going to look at for the purpose of forgiveness is the 8 weeks following initial disbursement. Note that initial disbursement is required to happen within 10 days of approval, SBA approval of that loan. So 10 days later, at least an initial disbursement, with full disbursement no later than 30 days after SBA approval. And then you as the business need to really track your expenses against the disbursement. So what are you using those proceeds for? And make sure that you have good documentation around what you're using for payroll costs, what you're using for other eligible expenses, including mortgage interest, rent payments, utility payments, interest payments on other debt obligations, those sorts of things. You need to make sure that you've got great records on that, because that's what the lender is going to look for when you come and say, okay, I'd like my loan forgiven. Again, you might want to ask your lender also what they are looking for from the forgiveness component. So the two key elements go into the forgiveness calculation. One is, did you spend at least 75% of your disbursement on payroll costs? And number two, did you maintain your headcount? So again, making sure that you're able to speak to and have records that demonstrate those two elements. If you do both, you can receive up to 100% forgiveness of the loan, including that other up to 25% that may be used for these other eligible use of proceeds. If your loan isn't fully forgiven, then that remaining amount would continue on the 2-year term at 1%. From the standpoint of calculations for forgiveness, we're still pulling together guidance on what that looks like, what the formulas will look like, that sort of thing. So more to come, stay tuned on that front. And you'll note that eligible use of proceeds are different than those expenses used to calculate the loan amount. Next slide. Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, again, I talked to that as far as our status right now. We are currently processing those applications we've already received on a first in, first out basis. It's a working capital program with loans up to $2 million directly with the SBA. So you made application with us, we underwrite it, we service it, the whole 9 yards. Interest rates at 2.75% for nonprofits, 3.75% for small businesses with terms up to 30 years. And again, very similar group of entities that are eligible to participate, including sole proprietors and many other business structures that are there. You will want to be able to, it will ask you to assert that you have experienced substantial impact due to COVID-19 to your working capital, basically your working capital resources. Next slide. Now, as opposed to the PPP, which is a payroll history decision only, EIDL is a credit-based decision, so we'll pull your credit. We're going to look at repayment ability. Do you have cash flow to support the debt service? And we will ask for collateral as well on loans over $25,000. Now, this is kind of a general business asset collateral request, collateral lien. It's not looking for specifically property or anything else. It's just general business assets. EIDL also requires personal guarantee on loans greater than $200,000, meaning you're pledging your personal assets against the loan. Next slide. The advance was part of the CARES Act, and this offered up to $10,000 grants to small businesses to get cash in the hands of small businesses as quickly as possible. Eligibility is the same as the EIDL. I mentioned up to $10,000. The analysis is based on your headcount. So for each employee, you are allocated $1,000 up to $10,000 for 10 employees. Funds will be made available within days following successful application and direct deposit into your account. Now, important to note that we had a huge influx when we opened the application for this program. So we're currently catching up on all of the advances. We started disbursement on the advances about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and those are ongoing. So so expect if you applied, you know, there still was some time lag depending on when you applied to the program and if you had a fully complete application. Note also that you may not get a notification that the advance is happening. So you may note that all of a sudden funds are direct deposited directly into your account. So just be aware of that. If you applied for that advance and all of a sudden you see a tranche of funds that show up, that may be what it is. Next slide. From the standpoint of application, again, if we open it up again, it's a single streamlined application. You apply for both the EIDL and the EIDL advance at the same time. It doesn't require any document upload. It's I'd say very seamless, very streamlined. You put your financial information in, and that's what's used to make the decision on the loan application and the advance. Once you apply, you receive email notification with the application number, indicating that your application has been received, and then it goes into the queue again on a first in, first out basis. You can apply by paper, but we don't recommend it. It'll take a lot longer. Next slide. Biggest thing here that I'd say is double check the information you put into your application. That's the biggest thing that's going to slow it down is if a loan officer has to reach out to you. It slows down the automated functions that we have to get these things moving as quickly as possible. If you are approved for an EIDL and you need more funding, you're like, hey, that's not enough, then you can request additional funding, but you will need to provide additional information and documentation to support that request. So you would work with your individual loan officer to support that effort. Finally, if you are declined and your loan is denied, you do have 6 months within which to request reconsideration, meaning you can, what'll happen is if you're declined, they'll send you a letter telling you why you were declined and the reconsideration process, and then you can address the specific declination reasons and potentially, you know, and receive at least reconsideration and potentially approval on that again. One thing I didn't mention on the EIDL advance, I just want to touch on is that is a grant. So if you receive the advance and you're approved for the loan, then the amount of the loan is reduced by the amount of the advance that you received. If you are declined on the loan or on the EIDL loan, you still do not have to repay that advance. It's a grant. Next slide. SBA debt relief. Again, this is part of the CARES Act. High level, if you have a SBA 7A or 504 loan, you're current with your payments, you're eligible for SBA to pay your principal and interest for a period of 6 months. if you apply for and receive a new 7A or 504 loan prior to September 27, 2020, you are also eligible to receive 6 months of payments for principal and interest. So this should be seamless to you. The SBA is working with your lenders to make sure this happens. But again, as you review your statements, you just want to make sure that this the debt relief you're receiving debt relief if you have one of these loans, and if not, encourage you to reach out to your lender. Next slide. Last capital access program is the Express Bridge Loan Program. This applies for those of you that may have a lending relationship or a banking relationship with an SBA Express lender, and it offers up to $25,000 working capital loan, up to $25,000 with minimal paperwork. This is a normal kind of SBA loan. The style is pretty conventional in that up to 7-year terms. SBA charges fees on the loans, kind of the normal process. But again, it can help you meet those emergency working capital needs that you're experiencing due to COVID-19 and the coronavirus. Next slide. Last key element of resources that I want to touch on is our SBA resource partners. SBA funds organizations across the state to help support your business advising and counseling needs at no cost to you as the business owner. That includes the Illinois Small Business Development Centers, SCORE, Women's Business Development Centers, Veteran Business Outreach Centers. Great resources as you try to navigate both the application process for these various programs, as well as when we're not in kind of COVID-19 reaction mode, as you look to update your business plan, as you look to grow and expand your business, as you look for other sources of financing. These organizations can help you think through what you're trying to accomplish and try and help you navigate to the best resources and the best financing options that may be out there. So again, great resources. Encourage you to reach out to them. Even if you don't have a need right now, to start building that network of advisors that you have in your kind of, board of advisors, I guess, informal board of advisors to help you with your various business decisions that you're making. And next slide. Go to the next one, please. And this is just contact information for SBA and in our programs. Certainly for the latest and greatest on SBA's programs around like debt resources, other resources, is going to be sba.gov/coronavirus. Disaster programs, sba.gov/disaster. If you need help figuring out where you need to go, you can reach out to us at the Illinois District at illinois.do@sba.gov. We try to get back to everybody within 24 hours, if not faster. And our website is sba.gov/il. If you did apply for an EIDL or an EIDL advance and you haven't heard anything or you're wondering what's going on, I'd encourage you to reach out to our Disaster Customer Service Center at 800-659-2955. As part of that, I'd encourage you to try and speak with a Tier 2 help desk person, as they can actually access the system and probably give you a better idea of what your loan status is and what the next steps may be. I'll close with just from a timeline perspective on EIDL. With massive number of applications in process, we're trying to work through those as quickly as possible. I can't give you a good timeline for when your particular application may be, a decision would be made, even if you told me when you applied, because we just don't have those timelines set, at least not, we don't have visibility to it with the in the district office at this point. We're hopeful to have better tools and ways that we can get you that information very soon. But for now, we're kind of limited on that front. From the standpoint of the PPP, know that once SBA approves that loan, lender is required to make an initial disbursement within 10 days. And what that initial disbursement is depends on the lender. So talk to your lender. with full disbursement within 30 days. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Congressman.
Thank you so much, Bo. So we're going to open up to questions. If you have a question, again, please put it in the chat field, and we've got some folks who are going and sorting through. And if you joined in late or you missed some of the slides, all of this presentation, the video, the slides will all be available. We'll post it as soon as this is done, and we can upload it to our website, casten.house.gov. And if you go there, you can get it. So if you missed an email address or something like that, or some other piece of information, it will be there. As are the what is this, number 4 for us, I think, Bo, that we've done of these things. So some of the historic ones there as well. But let us stop now and open up for your questions. Again, type them in the chat, and there is somebody behind the scenes who I think is going to start reading questions to us.
Yes, hi Bo, hi Congressman. Denise asks if a nonprofit that is a 501c6 will be eligible for PPP. They are a small business and they are struggling to stay afloat.
Sure. So as of right now, 501c6s are not eligible for the PPP program. It's limited to 501c3s and 501c19s.
We have, Denise, there's a sizable coalition of members, myself included, who have pushed to expand to the broader universe of 501s that are out there. Ultimately, we were not successful at getting that into this round. We're aware of the issue, but again, as Bo said, is limited to 3s and 19s as it sits right now.
Daniel understood that the initial legislation did not cover startups. Does the new PPP package provide support for startup corporations?
Sure. So the key eligibility factor is that you were in business and had either formal employees or 1099 independent contractors as of February 15th, 2020. So you will need to be able to demonstrate that you were in business at that point in time and that you had had employees. So, that could be a variety of different records that you maintain, whether it's your articles of incorporation or other types of evidence that would help to support your kind of when you started your business.
I think you can probably appreciate there's a certain compliance issue there, because since the PPP structure is forgivable if it covers 75% of your historic payroll expense, if you don't have historic payroll expense, that's a difficult piece to go through, because we very much wanted to not repeat some of the mistakes in hindsight that were made in 2008 when corporations got loans and then the loans were used to distribute to shareholders or executive compensation. And so there's rules here that say you need to make sure that at least 75% of that goes to your existing employee base. That does make it a little problematic for startups, we realize, but it's a compliance problem.
This question is from Cam, who emailed us and asked, I have applied for the PPP program, the EIDL loan, and the Chicago Small Business Resiliency Fund. Beyond these, are there any other avenues that small businesses can pursue to get relief?
So from an SBA perspective, I think we do have all of our conventional, like normal programs are still available, which include, other loan programs that support, working capital, property acquisition, a variety of different applications. So that's one avenue. Another avenue is we do, in addition to our lending, kind of conventional lending resources, we also work with a number of micro lender intermediaries who also provide loans up to $50,000 to small businesses to help them with their various, again, working capital and or property acquisition type needs. So those are definitely available. And if you go to sba.gov/coronavirus, there is a brief discussion of the other options that are available in addition to the PPP and the EIDL.
I would also, at the risk of making promises on behalf of people who aren't on the call, at the end of the presentation, you would listed some of the other resources like the Veterans Advisory Groups and scores. And, as a I guess I'm still an entrepreneur. I haven't done a proper job application in a long time. But I never want to say that the entire universe of ways to fund your business is limited to 3 things that we happen to think of on this call. But I would definitely, SCORE has historically been a good resource for folks like that to think through the broader universe. But as far as federal and state programs, I think you probably hit the big ones.
David would like to know if you can confirm when the EIDL applications will open, and do you expect additional EIDL funds to be available after the pipeline is worked through?
Yeah, so right now I do not have a timeline as to when the EIDL application may open again, and I also do not have visibility into what the pipeline looks like right now. So I'm sorry, I can't give much illumination on that topic.
So Christine isn't sure if she'll get approved for a PPP loan. Can you explain pandemic unemployment insurance to her?
That's not my sweet spot for sure. I would go to Illinois Department of Employment Security's website to get more information on that topic. I know that the state's been working very hard to also communicate the parameters around that program. So if you get with the Congressman's team, I'm sure that we can get you an answer with more information on that topic through the state.
Yeah, the unemployment insurance program was significantly expanded in the CARES Act, and I think that's you took the words out of my mouth, Bo. Follow up, and we can get you details on that. The one thing that I would caution you on, and this is why I said at the start that I think the next round we really need to focus on state programs. There was a several order of magnitude increase in demand on the Illinois APS system, and there's been a lot of delays because just the system and the infrastructure wasn't set up to handle the incoming flow that's there. And we are making it a priority in Washington to increase the support to states so that those resources are there. But reach out to our office, reach out to your state rep as well, who may have a little bit more leverage over the state implementation of that program. But it is going to be a little bit slower than we'd like to, but there is significant funding that was there in the last bill.
Yvonne is a sole employee in a corporation. She stands to lose a substantial portion of commission income due to reduction in payroll. The loss won't take place until January 2021 when her client policies will be audited. I believe she's saying she expects to experience economic injury in the future, but has not yet. Would she qualify for PPP?
So, I mean, the criteria for qualifying for PPP is pretty much, focused on basically, the eligibility criteria, which is that you're a small business owner, a sole proprietor, independent contractor, so on and so forth, and demonstrating your monthly average payroll. Now, if you are an independent contractor or self-employed, the documentation that you would use to support the need is you can find that on Treasury's website. But for example, a 1040 Schedule C. I think the thing that you need to look at, and this is going to be a decision that each business owner needs to make on their own, is that assessment of need. So the way the language in the application says speaks to and really addresses, I think, this topic is that, and you have to certify that this is the case, that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. So, this isn't intended to be a windfall for people that their business is doing just fine right now and looks to be doing fine in the future. It's intended to help support those businesses that are experiencing that the economic uncertainty is causing issues. So again, it's somewhat subjective, but I think each business owner needs to take a hard look at their situation, and if they believe that the situation is serious, then and they're eligible through other criteria to apply, then by all means. But making that like sincere review of what your needs are is, I think, really important, because these aren't unlimited resources. And people that, there's lots of people that have extreme need and are unable to access some of these resources, because there may be other people that don't need it but are just taking it anyway. So, I think we all need to be good citizens in this case.
I would also add, and maybe I misunderstood Yvonne's question, but it sounded like you were asking whether future economic losses that you expect to experience can be factored into the program. And it's important to understand the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the maximum amount you can borrow in that program is a function of a credit analysis, and there's caps on the loan as well, but that's driven by your credit. The PPP program, the amount you can borrow is a function of your historic payroll. Neither of those are sized based on a loss in the future, so it's not a grant to future losses. Although that potential for losses is what makes you eligible for the programs. So as you think through your own business planning, think about the amount that you're eligible to borrow, and then you've got to, of course, balance that against the other pieces of your businesses, and and how that maps against your revenue and profits going forward.
Okay, Ron has this question. His banking institution is capping all PPP loans at $100,000. Do they have the right to do that? If he applies somewhere else, he was told that if you apply in 2 places, you get bumped out. Is Ron able to seek more than $100,000 if he qualifies for it?
The rules of the program state that it's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll cost. So I haven't heard of the instance where a bank is limiting people to a certain amount, and that may be due to some of their capital constraints that they've got as a lending institution. Now, from the standpoint of making multiple applications, my understanding is the way that it works is that there's nothing in the rules that say you can't apply to multiple institutions. However, you can only receive one PPP loan. So in essence, what happens is that first PPP loan that is submitted and approved by the SBA is the loan that's approved. And then any others that will go in will be caught due to, in the system, filtered and declined because you've already been approved for one PPP loan.
Yeah, if you're having issues like that, Ron, please follow up with our office, because this ultimately is not. There's really no credit risk here for the banks. This is the federal money. The banks administer these programs, and they do a good job in general of administering the programs, and we rely on them to do that. But this is not the bank's money that's being loaned. So if they're doing something that sounds like it's not precise in the rule, give us a ring, and we'll see if we can help.
Gary has this question. If a sole proprietor who is self-employed put 0 for the number of employees on the EIDL application, would they not be eligible for the EIDL loan? Should they reapply and put 1 as the number of employees?
I don't know the answer to that question as far as how they're looking at it in the loan processing center. So, and unfortunately, right now, there's no way to change that unless the only avenue you might have is to call the customer service center and work with them to try and get to at least a tier 2 person who can help you navigate making that adjustment to your application. So that's what I would recommend.
There may be an issue there, and this is more for PPP than EIDL, but I know in the last round we had some folks where, if you're a sole proprietor, sometimes you're a little unclear on what part of your cash flow is distributed to you as income and what part of your cash flow is distributed to you as a dividend, because when you're a sole proprietor, those 2 things are kind of the same thing. And we had a story we got last time from a company that was a sole proprietor and had recently shifted to classifying 50% of the owner's income as W-2 income and 50% they were taking as distributions. And it was only that portion that they had a historic record of classifying as W-2 income that counted, again, because the structure of this is not designed to allow you to increase dividends to investors. It's designed to cover payroll. And there may be some challenges there, but work with your lender, work with the SBA to figure out how to process that. accurately. But if historically most of the money you've taken out has effectively been as distributions to ownership, that's going to be hard to reclassify.
And if I could just, the Treasury actually posted yesterday how to calculate maximum loan amounts that includes some of those maybe idiosyncratic kind of way that people are taking distributions that will hopefully inform if you have, if you use a K1 or if you're an S Corp or if you're a sole proprietor. There's a lot of great information in there. So if as you go through your application, I would highly recommend that you review that document. It's on the Treasury's CARES website, and it's how to calculate maximum loan amounts by business type.
Catherine is asking about the PPP program, which now requires a portion of the funds to go to minority-owned businesses. The SBA PPP form does not require disclosure. How will that be notated and monitored?
So at least from an SBA perspective, or I'm sorry, from like a PPP program perspective, the application does not really ask for any demographic information at this time. I can't say whether there's going to be changes to the application process to do so. I think the intent of the $60 billion that was allocated as part of the PPP appropriation to community lenders, smaller lenders, and credit unions, CDFIs, SBA microlender intermediaries. The intent of that effort was to make sure that all communities had access to these programs and to better enhance the ability of all communities to participate.
Yeah, and I think of that 60 billion, half of it, so 30 billion, was earmarked specifically for minority, I think minority women, veteran or businesses. There's a chunk of it in there. If that describes your situation, be sure to flag it for the banks so that you can make sure to be earmarked in that tranche. But I think, as I said at the start, I want to focus on implementing. That's what the law says, that the executive branch and the folks at the SBA have to figure out how to set up the paperwork to make sure it's compliant.
Okay, I have a couple of questions about the lenders. Tamara asks if she already applied for the PPP but did not receive funds, can she apply through a different lender now? And Greg would like to know if it matters where the lender is. He has an application with an out-of-state lender.
Sure. So first question, talked a little bit ago. As far as the SBA rules are concerned, there's nothing prohibiting you from applying through multiple channels for the loan. Just know that as soon as that first loan is approved, assuming it is, then all the others will be declined. So it's not like you'll have like 4 loans get approved and then you can pick which lender you want to work with. It's just going to be strictly based on that first application that goes through. So that's question 1. Question 2 is the program's indifferent to where the lender is. So if you found a lender somewhere else that will take your application, in fact, there's national lenders that are participating, whether it's in the fintech space or other types of lenders who are operating nationally. And so no, there's no physical location requirement on the lending institution.
The one thing that I'd add on that, and this is not a legislative, but this is just sort of a business advice question. Everything Bo said is exactly right. However, the banks, the rate of applications was so huge that essentially the sooner you had a fully compliant loan in a fully compliant bank, the earlier you were likely to be in the queue, and the queue kind of ran out before all the applications were in. And so if the bank doesn't have a history of 7A lending, even though they're fully qualified, it may just be a little bit slower. If you don't have a history with that bank, even though they're fully qualified and you're fully qualified, it may be a little bit slower. What we have heard anecdotally, and enough anecdotes that I think this is probably completely valid, but I don't have the full data set, is that in general, the big banks were much slower and much less efficient at getting these loans processed than some of the smaller local regional banks were. So if you are in a position where you have multiple banking relationships, I would, all else equal, I'm probably biased towards the smaller banks, just given what we saw last time. But again, I'm not making a recommendation, I'm just telling you what we saw. But I think it would at least be prudent for you to say, if you've got some discretion, to ask them how many loans they get last time, what percent did they convert, what was their hit rate. They should have that data and use that as you sort of shop for the bank that's going to be best positioned to set you up for success.
Okay, Patrick notes that Bo mentioned that the bank must disperse within 10 days, but has up to 30 days to fully disperse the funds. When does the 8-week clock start? And does the time extend past June 30th, or must all the funds be used by June 30th for possible forgiveness?
Yeah, so it's 8 weeks from date of initial disbursement. So as we look at timing where we are right now, right? Those 8 weeks may extend beyond June 30th, but it's going to be that 8-week period that we're going to look at for forgiveness from initial disbursement.
Sharon says her company dismissed one full-time employee for cause and had one part-time employee resign. She wants to know if they can hire other employees in their place. Is it based on payroll or headcount or both?
Sure. So it's based on both payroll and headcount. However, it doesn't mean that you have to have the same employees on staff. So in the instance that you're talking about, if you had 2 people leave, but you hired 2 new people, that would be fully reasonable within the guidelines of the program.
So Bob's company is an S Corp with open payables to 1099 contractors. They don't have the funds to pay them at this time. While these 1099 contractors can apply directly for PPP relief, that has no bearing on what Bob's company owes them. Do you have any suggestions on how to adjust this from the PPP loan if they receive one?
So there's no, from the standpoint of the PPP, I can only speak within the rules and guidelines that we have for the program, which are that eligible use of proceeds are for payroll costs, which are formal employees and their benefits that you would pay, mortgage interest, rent, utilities, interest on other debt incurred before February 15th. So those are the eligible uses of the proceeds. So there's not like a mechanism through the PPP to pay independent contractors specifically. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I don't. Those are the constraints under which the program is.
Well, I think, and Bo, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Those 1099 employees that you described, whether you were current on what you owed them or not, are not going to factor into the amount that you can borrow through the PPP. What's going to factor in is what you've paid to your W-2 employees, what have you. So if you go through and you qualify, that'll set how much cash you have. How you then use that cash informs the degree to which your PPP loan is forgivable. And so, you'll then, as you do with all the cash in your business, you'll have to make some choices. You've got your rent expense, you've got your working capital, all the costs that you have to manage, and you're going to have to figure that out within the context of knowing. And again, I'm stipulating here that you successfully received an amount of money, but the amount of money that you received didn't factor in that 1099 piece. So I think there is, and I'm not suggesting anything about how you prioritize that, but I think it's 2 separate questions. Do you get money to cover those 1099 employees? No. Can you use that money to cover other expenses? Yes, but it will affect whether or not the loan is forgivable. Do I have that about right, Bill?
Yeah. Yep. That's on track. And there are like a certain number of, and I mentioned them, what are eligible expenses or expenditures that are appropriate for the program, are eligible expenditures for the program.
Okay, Jerry would like to know what provisions were included in the latest funding of the PPP, which passed Thursday, to ensure that PPP loans are truly going to small businesses rather than large companies like Potbelly. What is being done to have banks communicate with their PPP applicants? And what are the chances of a third round of PPP funding for small businesses? Because people are afraid they'll get passed over again in this round.
So in general, the provisions of the PPP weren't changed from last time. The rules were that you had to be eligible, you had to have fewer than 500 employees in a location. There were some limitations for certain types of businesses where the entity may be higher. So, I think some of the, the Ruth's Chris stories were because of a recognition that in a chain of restaurants, if you're an employee at a restaurant that has 30 employees versus if you're an employee at a restaurant that has 30 employees but happens to be a large chain, your situation is fundamentally the same. But there were some abuses that happened, and I've been pleased to see that Ruth Chris and some other folks have returned those funds because for political reasons. We didn't change the rules. What we changed in the latest PPP was really trying to expand the range of banks, what we were talking about before, some of the credit unions, the small mid-sized banks, CDFIs, so that we could try to make sure that money reached into corners of the economy that it didn't get through last time. So hopefully it answers the first question. With respect to the second piece, I'd reiterate what I said at the start. And I want to be careful. I'm not predicting the future. I don't have that particular superpower, but I think it's safe to say that nobody in the history of our species has any prior experience injecting nearly $3 trillion into the U.S. economy in 45 days. So we are very much, things are changing in real time. And I couldn't have predicted we would have had to run through the first batch of PPP and renew it as quickly as we have, and so I don't want to predict the future. However, there is a very keen awareness, certainly by me personally and by many of my colleagues, that the first CARES provision had money for a lot of things, including the PPP, healthcare, unemployment insurance, money to states and municipalities. And a lot of those things were exhausted. We were able to secure support in the Senate on a bipartisan basis to extend the PPP. We were not able to secure support in the Senate on a bipartisan basis to extend some of those other programs, which are also running out. And so I would work under the assumption that the sort of the rising pressure in the places where there's gaps in the economy that we're going to need to prioritize next is going to be more states, municipalities, some of the healthcare systems, and the postal service, places like that are really running on fumes right now. And I'm not making a prediction, but I would never advise anybody to work under the assumption that every 3 to 4 weeks Congress is going to inject another $600 billion into the economy.
Oh, can you spend a little time explaining the difference between how an employer would count part-time versus full-time employees for the PPP?
Yeah, it's we're still waiting on additional guidance, especially on the back end from a forgiveness standpoint, what the from a headcount standpoint, because it speaks to FTEs on the as it relates to what your headcount level is on the forgiveness side. From the standpoint of the calculation of employees from a size of business perspective, it counts full-time and part-time employees on a one-to-one basis. So for each full-time employee, you add one person. For each part-time employee, you add one person. The FAQ, the frequently asked questions that Treasury put out, has specific guidelines on how to calculate your monthly average payroll, average monthly headcount for the purposes of the initial calculation and for application, which is what I'd refer you to. I don't want to take up too much time right here, but I think that's probably the best place to go, because it's it's probably more complicated than I can explain just in this brief amount of time that we have.
Matthew would like to know how to check the status of his EIDL. He applied on 3/31 and has heard of people who applied in August who've received responses and funds from the program. Along those same lines, Kamal would like to know when he can expect to get word whether he was denied or approved for EIDL. Is there somewhere where he could check on the status of his application?
Sure. So that's where folks are going to have to reach out to the SBA Disaster Customer Service Center. Best thing that I could recommend is calling the 800 number at 800-659-2955. And they basically got 2 tiers of reps there. So the first tier is addressing kind of like, general questions, those sorts of things. Tier 2 is where they have more access to look at the loan systems. Try to get to somebody who's tier 2 who can give you better information about where your loan is in the process. And for example, what the status is. One thing that you need to be aware of is that, when SBA makes an approval on an EIDL, they send out an email. I've heard instances where the email gets caught in people's spam. So you might want to check your spam filters pretty regularly just to make sure that an approval didn't come through or some other notification from SBA to advise you that something had changed. So that's just one other thing, but I think that 1-800 number is going to be your best avenue, and try to get to somebody who's tier 2 to help you identify where your particular loan is. Typically, again, the recommendation is weekends after hours are the best times to call. The volume's lower and you'll have a better chance of spending less time waiting for people to pick up, to get to a live body.
Okay, Cassie says that her bank's application does not allow her to reduce the requested loan amount. What if her business does not need 2.5 times average monthly payroll?
From my perspective, I'd work with the bank when you're going to closing to discuss the actual needs and see if there's an opportunity at that point to reduce the amount. I can't. From an SBA perspective, we have the process that's 2.5 times, and that's the max loan amount people can request. But how banks actually implement on their end is in a lot of ways delegated to them. So the borrower would need to work with their bank on that front.
You should know though that an awful lot of people who were approved last time didn't take the full amount, and they worked with their bank and got an amount that they thought was appropriate for them. So you're not reinventing the wheel there. It's possible, I suppose, that's unfamiliar to your bank, but my guess is that you're just in a sequencing issue with them. But you'd absolutely have that option.
Okay, Linda wants to know whether payroll processing fees can be paid by PPP funds, or do those need to be removed from her loan application?
I don't know the answer to that specifically. I would need to refer back to the interim final rule to see if there's any guidance on that front.
Okay, thank you. We do have a few minutes left for closing remarks. I wanted to remind everybody that this will be available on our website at casten.house.gov. And also the phone numbers for our district office, 630-520-9450. And our Washington, D.C. office is 202-225-4561. Thank you.
Bo, any closing remarks?
Yes. So again, things open up on Monday at 9:30 a.m. for the PPP. If you haven't applied, encourage you to get out there if you think it's appropriate for you. And keep your eyes peeled to sba.gov/coronavirus. That's where all of our information is, and you can stay updated as well by going to sba.gov/updates to have our newsletter, which we come out as soon as we have additional information. We tend to get it out as quickly as possible. So, Congressman, it's great, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this with you again. I think you said it's number 4. Again, appreciate your help in getting the word out on these programs.
Thank you so much, Bo, as always, for your expertise and your time. Thank you to Jessica Maley, who is behind the scenes, but also heavily involved in this, and to Laura, whose voice you heard mediating all this from our office. To all of you, if we didn't get to your question, please follow up and let us know. As I said before, and as you heard Laura say, you'll see all this on our website. But then most importantly, be safe, be healthy, be well. This is a truly unprecedented time in our history. I think we've lost about 53,000 Americans from this virus so far. And the good news is that would have been a lot worse had we not taken seriously all of these social distancing measures. And for us to get through this and get to a point where we can get some of these stresses out of our lives that I know you are all feeling, we've got to make sure that we continue to take the public health measures, be safe, and get through this together. And I've just been so, for lack of a better word, just inspired. There's been so much decency that's come out of this moment from, folks who are volunteering and supporting their local food pantries, folks who are, religious institutions that are stepping up, and basically people who are providing shoulders to lean on for those who could use a spare one. So thanks for all you do, because we're going to get through this together. And in the meantime, I hope this information was useful. Be strong, be safe, be well, and we will be in touch. Thank you.